Ethereum is pumping. It's at a brand new all-time high. Everybody and their grandmother can see that. But there are hidden signs on this chart that we're breaking down in this video that make this much crazier than how it looks at first. So there's a lot we're going to be breaking down here. This ties directly in line with Bitcoin dominance and other amazing opportunities. Some of you guys may have missed Ethereum. Some of you may feel like you weren't exposed enough to it. There are, I think, going to be many more opportunities to profit off these kind of moves in this market moving forward. We're going to be breaking that down in this video. But before we do, we need to understand where we're at. And if we go ahead and put a line at the all-time high that we've just set today, we can see, tracing this back to 2021's all-time high, that we are only marginally higher than the previous all-time high, maybe just a percentage point higher. So we haven't done anything that crazy yet. And if we adjust for inflation, Ethereum is not doing well. Ethereum's still far below its previous all-time high compared to where we think it is. And I think that's important because if you truly do feel bullish about Ethereum, then it pretty much makes sense that you also expect Ethereum to set a better all-time high adjusted for inflation. And that probably indicates further upside. So that in itself is really cool. Let's take a look at how we got here and just kind of understand what Ethereum is doing. Now, here on the daily chart, Ethereum bottomed out toward the beginning of April, and it's pretty much been a non-stop rally up. The largest kind of corrections that we've seen were here, 26%, and here for 15%. We're really not seeing particularly large corrections in this market, and it is charging higher. Now, the other key thing that we've seen is that every time Ethereum sets a high and then breaks above that high, it does tend to rally quite well, right? And we can actually probably drop another line right here. You can see that when you kind of set this high here and you explode above it, we're getting a big breakout to that next high. It's not a small move. It's a 52% move on this occasion. When we pop above this high, it's a 37% move. When we pop above this high, it is a 23% move. So we've just popped above the previous high right now. And if we are truly doing something with this, and we're going to see perhaps a 20% move, 30% move, that easily puts our next speculative target for Ethereum in the high 5,000s. Admittedly, I kind of think we should have seen these price levels back in 2021, but that's totally okay. The fact that it's taken so long to get here, in my opinion, just makes the subsequent explosion even larger. So super cool stuff. Now, Ethereum against Bitcoin continues to tell us that story. Now, if you were watching this YouTube channel throughout the bear market and even throughout the bull market, you're going to remember that I was very bearish on this Ethereum BTC chart all the way down until we got to these three levels here on the chart. These are the three levels that I said would be phenomenal buys for Ethereum. At first, I really thought it was this one, but as we approached it, I kind of changed my mind and I said that it would be these two. And this is, of course, pretty much exactly where Ethereum bottomed out. So huge shout out to those of you that are subscribed to the channel. You wouldn't have missed that super time-sensitive analysis. We've been on point throughout this market cycle. Make sure that you don't miss out on the next updates we're putting out. If you haven't already, check that bell icon and all that good stuff. Now, this is the really big thing that I wanted to make this video about. This is the reason we're making this video. Is that Ethereum right here against Bitcoin has this macro zone of resistance at about 0.04 BTC per token, right? So that means it costs 0.04 BTC to buy one Ethereum token. And if we go ahead and zoom out and kind of understand what this price range tells us, all we're doing is we're looking at this kind of gray-blue box here. This is clearly a kind of zone that's been important for Ethereum historically. If we kind of take a look back at what's happened at these kind of price levels for Ethereum in the past against Bitcoin, we saw, pretty big kind of reversals taking place at this level, resulting in massive support, or some pretty nasty rejections also coming off this range as well. So as far as a kind of macro range, this one's quite formidable for Ethereum. It was also resistance recently throughout this market cycle as well. As Bitcoin was sucking up dominance, this is where Ethereum was starting to encounter some trouble. Now, this is all super important because that means we should be finding resistance here, and we haven't actually found resistance here now. So, that is a sign that this thing could potentially continue to rally very hard until it gets up to that next speculative zone of resistance at about 0.52 BTC per token, which has also been a very macro important level of resistance. Now, this whole rally for Ethereum against Bitcoin has been characterized by not really finding any resistance. We had we found resistance in each of the zones we were expecting, to be clear, right? I mean, we found, pretty clear resistance over here. It resulted in, a moderate to small pullback here for Ethereum against Bitcoin. And then, of course, we had this one right here, which, didn't really even result in a pullback. We just kind of consolidated sideways inside of resistance, which is, of course, very, very bullish. On this occasion here, right as we enter the range, we got a tiny pullback, but nothing massive at all. And inside of the range, nothing. So this is an exception so far for Ethereum throughout this rally. Usually we're seeing better, more clear resistance at these macro levels, but Ethereum against Bitcoin on this occasion did not do that. Now, this points to two possible outcomes here, which I think are really, really important. The first one is kind of just that, look, we haven't topped out yet because we haven't made full work of this range yet. And I think that's pretty reasonable, right? The way I've defined this range, it tops out at about 0.43 BTC per token. And typically you do want to give it another couple percentage points, up to 3 percentage points higher, to prove that you truly are out of the woods. So anywhere kind of below this line, we're still in that same kind of macro resistance zone. We proved that with this right here, right? Ethereum very, very clearly got above this range by a little bit if we kind of measure it. And obviously these ranges are not drawn super precisely because it's impossible to do that. But, it's good enough. And we still managed to get 8% higher than that range and then ended up dipping down, right? So is it possible that we're doing the same thing right now? Yeah, 100%. I think that's actually really possible. In fact, if anything, I probably think that's more likely right now because I do have to expect some sort of pullback for Ethereum against Bitcoin. But I'll tell you what, we haven't shown signs of that coming. We've clearly shown signs, actually, of this rally intensifying, right? It started off kind of slow. We had a bigger kind of pullback. Ethereum against Bitcoin here dropped by 17%. It was a slower move, right? But then it's clearly sped up. I mean, the next point of continuation, the next continuation pattern took 18 days here. The first one here to kind of break that high took 70 days, so literally 2.5 months. This one only took, 2/3 of a month, and this one took even less time. From the time that we hit resistance to the time that we broke it was just over a week. So it's clearly intensifying as we're carrying on here, which means that even though I think we should obviously be finding macro resistance at macro resistance, the chart doesn't seem to care about that, and the chart is showing signs of that intensifying. Now, that's also reflected on Bitcoin's dominance, and by the way, what this means is crazy. We're getting to that. Hold yourself, because this is going to be worth it. First of all, let's take a look at the drops that we've seen, right? So the previous massive Bitcoin dominance drop that we saw was 11.5% in relative terms, and now we have surpassed that. We are now seeing a bigger Bitcoin dominance drop than any other drop throughout this entire market cycle so far, which makes it much more likely that this is the alt season. If it is the alt season, we're probably also late stages in the bull market cycle, which probably also means that we might not have too much longer to rally. I definitely don't think we're topping out this year. Despite that, and I've been very vocal about that, I still think that this can go on until kind of Q1, Q2 of next year minimum. But it is a sign that market tides are shifting. We're entering a different phase of the market. Is it still, is it possible at this stage to call for an alt season? Look, with what we're seeing on Bitcoin dominance right now, it's getting hard to argue that, you're not seeing a big drop like this, right? And I think that's important. Are we fully out of the woods? You know what, man? As far as technicals go, it's pretty much told us that we're in an alt season now. As far as market cycles go, and my understanding of how long they can last and what signs we show early on, which we're clearly still early on in this market cycle if you look at things like the S&P 500, it doesn't make sense that we're seeing an alt season. In fact, from that perspective, it looks more like we might get something, I don't know, maybe it drops much further, but it would still recover, potentially set a new high, but at the very least, maybe rise up, do something like this and then continue down. I think that's way more likely overall, because I still don't think that it's, the right time for that kind of alt season to happen. In fact, what I think is happening is that everybody who's invested in these coins is now getting a fucking ego, catching a little bit of arrogance in their drift, and that kind of thing usually does get humbled in these markets, even inside of bull markets. But the reason that all of this is so important is just purely because if we are looking at this situation here, ladies and gents, where Bitcoin dominance is dropping this hard, and it's clearly like primarily happening because of Ethereum gaining strength against Bitcoin, that is going to pave the way for altcoins to start exploding, and we're seeing that happen. If we take a look at Ethereum against Bitcoin here, and let's go ahead and take a different chart because I got too many drawings on this one. Let's go ahead and look at the Coinbase one. Tells us the same thing. What I want to do is I want to throw on the Solana BTC chart as well. I think that the Solana chart is obviously going to be a very interesting one to look at here because, we've clearly seen, Ethereum kind of steal the show a little bit, but we know what that tends to lead to, and we understand what this means from a psychological perspective as well. Of course, those of you that are subscribed are going to be so familiar with these ideas, but a very quick recap is that when Bitcoin, i.e. the safe asset, starts looking very, very attractive, and it stays attractive for a while, maybe even gets a little bit stale and boring, that's where people who've made profits are going to be looking to reinvest those profits into riskier markets. For example, Ethereum, as we understand, Bitcoin is number one, Ethereum is number two, both in terms of size, manipulation potential, liquidity, volume, and so on. And so, you're going to start seeing that money kind of get invested into second coins like Ethereum. And then when those Ethereum holders make money, that's when you really see a massive, massive explosion happening to the shit coins and altcoins beneath it. And I really think that Solana makes sense as a kind of next logical pick, because if we take a look at CoinMarketCap, just go ahead and refresh the page here, make sure we got the most up-to-date information. We are seeing Bitcoin right here with a market cap of 2.3 trillion, Ethereum sitting at 600 billion, and Solana down here at 113 billion. Now, I did skip Binance Coin and XRP because they're kind of different cases. Binance Coin's almost more of a stable that performs well, and XRP moves in its own way. Solana's the next kind of really big coin, and, beneath that, of course, we're excluding stables. The next kind of speculative coin is going to be 35 bill, right? So Solana's by far bigger than, a lot of these other coins. And if we do take a look at what Solana is showing us right now, Solana kind of had this like horizontal level that we could kind of draw like this. We can also, of course, draw it as a box, which I think would be very, very applicable. But no matter how you draw it, whether it's with these horizontal levels, whether it's with a kind of more, diagonal kind of trend line, we are seeing Solana clearly kind of break out and show some signs that this market is waking up. And it's absolutely no surprise whatsoever that really we're getting these breakouts happening after Ethereum's move has kind of matured. When I say matured, that doesn't mean I think it's over. I think Ethereum can get much higher against Bitcoin. But what I am saying for sure is that, Solana was rather muted during this whole time, right? Ethereum kind of had this sideways trading range here, and then it really started to do very well. Kind of like July, you could say, is where it really started to kind of take off mid-July. But Solana at that time was still hitting resistance levels in, relatively local ranges. It's only like very recently, over the last few days, where Solana has really been able to get that big explosion up. And we can't ignore the fact that this is happening against the backdrop of Ethereum BTC rallying really hard, right? Ethereum BTC is up massively right now. In fact, if we just look at, bear market to bull market, right, in terms of kind of how this has moved, right, from the previous bear market to this bull market, essentially, Ethereum sort of same levels against Bitcoin. Ethereum bottomed out at 0.16 BTC per token. This market cycle, it was 0.17 BTC per token. It's the same fucking thing. And if we look at where it ended up going, it was all the way up here at nearly 0.9 BTC per token. So, if we're bottoming out at the same place, is it conceivable that we top out at the same place? I think so. I definitely think that that's conceivable. But let's say it's not going to happen. Let's say that you top out, a fair bit lower than that. That's still 300% or plus or a 4 times gain from entry down at that very, very bottom level over there. Like I said, we pinpointed this with a lot of accuracy, with a lot of confidence here on this YouTube channel. If you missed it, you probably just weren't subscribed at the time, but make sure that that doesn't happen as this market cycle continues, because I know that that can be a little bit bitter, but I promise you this is not going to be the last or even best move of this market cycle. I think we're yet to see the best of this market cycle for sure, and that is very, very exciting as an idea for me, of course, because I want to be able to take advantage of that, and that's where you really start tapping into that compounding power as well, which I think is very, very important. But just from these perspectives, Ethereum against Bitcoin has a shitload more to go, but if it's showing this much aggression as it's kind of breaking resistance levels, and if it's dragging Bitcoin dominance below some of the key levels that it was sat at, it's now falling conclusively below that 60% range, that is a very, very strong indication that other altcoins could be next. And I don't think it's a surprise whatsoever that we're seeing this kind of breakout starting to take shape on Solana. It's a little bit too early to say, but if we are going off this yellow line, which I think is a pretty reasonable level for Solana, then we kind of have already started this breakout, right? Like, put it this way, if you're bearish on Solana BTC, this is a very, very bad thing to see for you, right? This is not something that you want to be seeing right now. And I think that's very telling because, of course, Ethereum's been leading the market for a while. It makes sense that some of that risk kind of starts getting spread out to other coins at this stage, and clearly those other coins are showing us signs of waking up. Here's Doge against Bitcoin, still not pulling off that breakout, but look at how much it's trying. I mean, it's had 1, 2, 3 fake outs just this year at this resistance level. And we're just not able to stay away from this resistance level. We could have ended up trading all the way down here, but we didn't. It's staying tucked right at the top of this range, waiting for that explosion. So a lot of these coins are waiting to get that explosion there. That doesn't mean they're going to get it. Things can change. Market dynamics can always flip. We are talking about the riskiest asset class possibly ever in history, of course. So, let's not get carried away, essentially, is what I'm saying. But as far as kind of, initial signs that tell us an interesting story, my goodness, we're getting something very, very strong here. So I think that is very cool. Now, a lot of people like to ask me to analyze Ethereum against the dollar. And frankly, I don't really want to do that, right? I don't think that it's necessary. I also don't think it's particularly feasible anyway, right? I mean, we've got these all-time high levels. And, when you break them and you're in blue sky breakout territory, it's very hard to say where you're going to go next or how you're going to go there or how quickly you're going to go there, how you're going to pump. And because those questions are very difficult to answer, I'm not really in the business of asking those questions. I want to ask questions that I can kind of predict a lot better. And that's where the Bitcoin chart comes back in play, right? If I'm looking at Ethereum against Bitcoin, I can very clearly see there's resistance up ahead. It's another 20% higher, for example. So Ethereum can probably rally quite well, right? These are conclusions that I can make quite easily. In line with that, I should also mention that, we've seen a little bit of a dip for Bitcoin today and yesterday as well. It can look concerning. I can understand why people think that, especially if we look at this on the daily time frame. Look, we've had a nice big candle right into multiple resistance zones, and now we're kind of pulling back, right? So this definitely does tell a bit of a scary story here, but I think it's kind of simple-minded because, to be honest, if you look at this from, the dominance perspective, Bitcoin is dropping down, yes, but that money is clearly flowing into other altcoins. Now, we can even see that story told a little bit more clearly if we look at total 2, which might still be dropping. Let's take a look. No, it's actually going up. Even if it is still dropping, that still represents, a lot more strength in altcoins than Bitcoin. But actually, no, the story is a little bit more clear than that. And where Bitcoin is dropping, that money is clearly moving into everything that's not Bitcoin. And so, yeah, Bitcoin's dropping a little bit, but dropping how? That money isn't leaving crypto. That money is actually taking more risk than it was taking previously, which is, again, a very strong sign of optimism for investors. It's a very strong sign of investor confidence. We've been looking at this and tracking these exact data points for weeks here, being able to tell this story with a high degree of accuracy. A lot of other people, market drops, they shit themselves, market goes up, they celebrate. We're not about that. We're just here to make money, and because we've got that much more realistic, grounded approach, we're also able to stay cognizant of these facts a lot easier than gamblers or degens in these markets, right? Bitcoin dropping a little bit isn't concerning because it just means that firepower has flown into other riskier markets, which is a sign of this bull. Honestly, it's a sign of this bull market continuing, at least until those rate cuts happen. I think the rate cuts have clearly proven themselves to be a bit of a sell the news event, and we've covered that on the previous live stream, so go back and watch that if you missed it. But definitely a very, very good sign there. Ethereum against the dollar, like I said, very, very hard to predict at this stage, but obviously it's round numbers that we're looking at. So that means, 5K flat, 5,250, 5.5, 5.8, 6, whatever feels like a significant round number. These are levels that you could potentially expect to turn into resistance. But honestly, guys, for the most part, I don't even think these are questions worth asking, right? If you're positioned, then, you're making money, then, you don't really have any questions to ask about it. Maybe you want to increase your exposure. You might have to look for some pullbacks to kind of buy those trades, to buy those coins at those levels, if that's, the kind of thing that you're looking to engage with at this stage in the market. But as far as kind of speculating on how high it could go, dude, it's anybody's guess. It really depends on, you know, the overall kind of health and longevity of this market cycle. And of course, that's going to be dependent a lot more on, you know, indices like the S&P 500, which have been closed because it's a weekend, but this is going to be opening up in about 19 hours from the time of recording. And that's going to give us a really, really good sign of where the S&P 500 could be going on the Monday open. Obviously, it's really definitely poised to keep on going higher, so that does continue to kind of pave the way for Bitcoin and by extension for Ethereum and by extension the rest of the altcoin market as well. So honestly, super, super big deal. Very, very exciting stuff. The biggest deal of them all is the fact that Ethereum just has so much strength against its macro resistance right now. And as a result, that it's managed to drag Bitcoin dominance this low. And as a result, other altcoins are starting to break out now as well. These are important warning signs, right? This doesn't mean that something is going to manifest. That doesn't mean that we're actually going to be seeing these big pumps across altcoins. But we're showing the right signs right now. And if this continues, then before you know it, we're going to be seeing some pretty crazy breakouts. So really cool, very, very exciting stuff. Obviously, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you smash up those likes, subscribe, tick the bell, all that good stuff. You've got phenomenal exchanges linked in the description down below, so check them out if you're interested and if you're not from a restricted region. We've got an amazing one-to-one program that lasts 12 weeks. It is expensive, it's very serious, but we've had only incredible results out of that program. So if you want to get yourself inside, then you can follow this link on screen right here as well, and a member of the team will give you some information about that. But with that all, ladies and gents, really hope you've enjoyed this one. You know what to do if you have, and we'll see you all in the next one.